All right, P.A.S. report listeners, the holiday season is here. Why not make your life easy and choose Design It Yourself gift baskets? Whether it's a gift for that special someone, family, friends, employees, corporate clients, you don't have to rack your brain anymore. These gift baskets are perfect for any person. At designityourselfgiftbaskets.com, gift baskets can be fully customizable, or you can choose hundreds of pre-arranged gift baskets. Design It Yourself gift baskets are festive for the holiday season, whether it's Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, and you can be sure that these beautifully decorated gift baskets will make anyone feel appreciated. No matter who you're shopping for, go to designityourselfgiftbaskets.com. And best of all, you get to save money. P.A.S. report listeners can get 10% off your order using code P.A.S. at checkout. So go to DIYGB.com, find the perfect gift this holiday season, and use coupon code P.A.S. at checkout to get 10% off today.
Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving, and hopefully you were able to take a break from all the madness that exists right now. As I said last week, sometimes it's good to tune out all the noise and spend time with those you care about. I'm sure most of you are sick of turkey at this point, but it was a good break. However, the thing that gets really aggravating, really frustrating, is when you go to put up the Christmas lights and half the lights on almost every strand are out. Trying to find the dead light, it's maddening. That's what happened to me this weekend. And unfortunately, I was getting so frustrated. I was about to tell the kids, you know what? I'm not even putting up lights this year. However, I cooled down, I got it done, and that's what you have to do at times. Just walk away, take a break, cool down a little, and get it done. That's the way it works, right? That's how life is. So I'm not going to bother you. I'm not going to rant about my Christmas lights, but anyone that has had to put up Christmas lights knows exactly what I'm talking about. I know that for a fact. All right. I want to get right to my guest today because I have Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, president of Project Sentinel. He's returning to the show, and I always enjoy my conversations with him. He is someone that understands how the international community works. I want to get his thoughts on everything that's going on. I am seeing some ominous signs on the horizon as far as the international landscape goes. It's not a secret that our power and influence has been declining. It's been declining since 2005. It stabilized a little bit under the Trump administration, but the decline continues. It's picked up speed. Power is a zero-sum game. As the power vacuum continues to open, countries are going to compete for that power. This has led to increasing instability throughout the international community. And then you want to factor in the ever-increasing cost of energy and food, as well as the decline of the global economy. It's an explosive combination, I can tell you that. So I want to talk to the Lieutenant Colonel about all of this. Before I jump in, subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. If you find the show informative, share it with your family and friends. And I want to hear what you think. Write a review on Apple Podcasts or drop me an email, podcast@pasreport.com. With that out of the way, I want to bring on Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, author of Operation Dark Heart, president of Project Sentinel. Great to have you back on the program, Lieutenant Colonel. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thanks, Nick. How are you?
I'm doing well. Glad to have you on. There's a lot going on out there. And right. I just want you to pinpoint for the audience, what do you believe are the biggest concerns to the United States on the international front?
So the biggest concern overall is one that actually impacts on domestic issues, which is energy, the net loss of dominance regarding the production of oil. Let me just be very clear on this. When Joe Biden decided to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline, he started then curtailing all of the ability of private companies to actually do exploration for new oil on federal lands. He keeps saying, "Oh, we've opened up all these contracts." No, they haven't. They basically give people access, but then they won't allow them to do the oversight requirements, the approvals needed to actually do something. It's like here you can go, but so that is impacted on oil futures, which has then affected everything because people know you're going to have to pay more for energy. People who actually have to plan logistics, and Nick, you understand this. We have a global network that depends on energy being cheap and abundantly available for everybody to use. And the moment you curtail that, you start this process of shutting things down, or activities down, because it becomes more expensive. And we're now to the point 2 years in where that point of brisance has come to the point of where people are getting to the point they can't afford the energy. Now that impacts on national security because you got to make people feel that you're doing the right thing for them. So Joe Biden raids the strategic reserves, the strategic oil reserves, and dumps that into the economy. And by the way, we just noticed that only lasted until about Election Day, and now
I'm shocked.
Back up. Yeah, I'm shocked. And by the way, we tell people this like, how are you not watching this guy do this? Anyway, but my point to you, Nick, is that this is an actual national security issue because of the twofer. You've weakened our economic foundation, and now you weaken our ability to actually fund, fuel, and maintain DOD, federal government resources in an emergency. So you've kind of just degraded our overall posture across the board over 2 years. So I do believe the economy and national security are linked. That's what the Trump administration felt. I felt that they did that correctly. And now at this point, because, and the third factor I should mention, if you really wanted to defund Putin's war, flood the market with oil. Get out there, open everything up, because they always talk about Putin's war and all this other. Nick, I don't remember the stats. I was reading this about a week ago. I don't remember the exact stat, but there's a significant percentage. I mean, something like 75% of the revenue that Putin gets to drive the war comes from the sales of Russian oil.
Yeah.
So if you want to actually have an effect on Putin, basically you've got to flood the market, drop the bottom out of energy, the price out of energy, and you can defund Putin. So it tells me, Nick, that all these three things are, they've destroyed the economy. They've not kept a sufficient reserve for the military and a national security crisis. And you're not really doing anything to defund Putin's war. That tells me that they're really not interested in trying to do those things necessary to keep and maintain the national security posture, effective national security posture of the United States.
And those are great points, because I said from the beginning, you want to break the back of Putin economically, you flood the markets and crash the prices. You bring up the point about permitting. Land leases don't translate into oil coming out of the ground, and we have all the regulations that exist. One of the things, the strategic national stockpile, we're at our lowest level since the early 1980s. Meanwhile, the country, it's even worse than that, because the country has grown tremendously since the early 1980s. So it's actually worse. We're at the lowest point probably in our history if we adjust for that. And then the diesel that nobody talks about. We don't have a major refinery hasn't been built. I think we had one in the last 40 years being built. And so we have refinery capacity issues. And on top of that, you have Saudi Arabia snubbing the United States. Did you ever think that you'd see that be happening, where even Russia didn't want a 2 million barrel a day cut? Even Russia was calling for only 1 million. And Saudi said, no, we'll just do 2 million. So our dependency on foreign adversaries has certainly increased. And for what?
Well, to that point, Nick, I think the fact that Biden, Tony Blinken, and one of the other guys, I know him personally, I can't remember his name right now, had actually negotiated this backdoor deal with the Saudis over the summer saying, we know you want to cut, but don't do it till December. And they thought they had that all wired, and of course they didn't. That speaks to the complete lack of credibility of Joe Biden.
And what we call it attempted collusion, isn't that attempted collusion?
Yeah.
Election?
That was directly. And then I still believe that's impeachable. I was just reading some articles today. They're looking at impeaching Biden, I think, over a number of legitimate things. So we could probably talk about that some other time, just go down that entire rabbit hole. But yes, that was collusion. And it was not meant to actually increase the security of the United States. There was no security aspect. It was all just, let me get through this election and win, so then you can cut all you want. And that tells me, obviously, Nick, he has no interest in helping the American people. To us, we're just resources there to help him promote and maintain his political agenda, which I think I'd like to believe most people are starting to understand that. So.
And it's a fraud, right? Because he constantly talks about, green energy will give us our independence, where we could be energy independent with oil and gas, but with the green energy movement, we have become solely reliant on China, right? They develop 90% of the world's batteries for the electric vehicles, and solar panels. They cornered the market on that. And they have the rare earth minerals in Africa and other places where they basically created this monopoly. So we're creating a dependency, and we already have a dependency on manufacturing for China, but an even greater dependency on China. How does that work to our advantage?
Oh, it doesn't. And let me kind of walk through this. And as you and your audience know, I've got a degree in environmental studies, so I actually am credentialed as much as the left doesn't like me. So, green energy depends on one thing for everything for it to work. It's called classic solar energy, which is fossil fuel. It's coal, natural gas, oil. All these things have to go in to anything that's green. To build an electric car, you just point out, you got to have all of these rare earths. You've got to have a lot of fossil fuel because all the plastics come from fossil fuel. I don't think they found a way to convert solar energy into plastic yet. Just saying. It's not going to happen. And then on top of that, you have to have carbon. A lot of those components need carbon, which is coal. All these things have to go into everything. And then, of course, to fuel it. The grid is not powered by solar energy or wind. It never will be. And I've noticed that every time they promote something, like over here where I live in North Carolina, they have huge fields of these big old wind turbines. They sold it saying, oh, there would be all this percentage of energy coming out of it. There would be it never produced anything near the percentage it was guaranteed. It's a huge albatross. So when you go
and there's a lot of deforestation that also takes place when we do these wind farms and solar farms.
Right. And they do. And to that point, all of these things they do for green devastates the environment. As someone who's got a degree, I'm appalled at the damage done to the environment. Strip mining, rare earths, taking and destroying economies in Africa because everybody wants that. So they have the Chinese and others go in there and devastate the local population to get access to this stuff. I mean, Nick, it's just unconscionable the damage that's being done to save the environment. I mean, I'm serious. I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? And then they want now to increase the scope and availability of electric cars. They've said, and that is not just Biden, but the Build Back Better bunch, they want to have 35% of all vehicles on the planet and all these first world nations converted to the electric grid by 2030. Nick, the grid cannot take that amount of increase without being doubled in capacity. That's number one. Number two, just to acquire the rare earths and the lithium for the batteries would require them to find 5 times more than the current known sources of lithium. And what are you going to do? What are you going to go strip mine all of that? Because that's what you're going to have to do. And you're going to look, to your point, to China for most of them. So there's absolutely zero benefit of trying to push us artificially at a time when the technology, the resources are not there to this green energy environment. It's not, it's all political. It's all, they've converted science into Marxism, and they're trying to push everybody into this controlled venue of choices where you can have your Prius in either black or white, but you're going to have a Prius. And that's what's going on here. It's unconscionable in my
But there was no thought even into these policies, right? So if we take a look at
Nick, no, I think there was thought, and it's linked to the idea of control of economy, of energy, and of commerce. That's what. So
I understand that aspect.
They know this. It's just they're pretending they don't. So.
I understand that aspect. What I'm saying is to actually push these policies through, there was no thought process involved. So take an urban center.
Right. Yes.
You have apartment complexes with maybe 1,000 people living in them in New York City, and there's a bunch of those around. Where are you putting all the chargers for the electric vehicles? And then what happens in the middle of the night when teenagers come through and start pulling the plugs out of cars and vehicles? Right. You know, when we look at California, they want to ban all gas-powered vehicles by 2030. And again, there's no plans to build new energy sources. There's no plans to build new power plants. That's what I mean by no thought process. And there's something that you were saying in an interview with someone else or a written piece. I forget where I read it. But you were talking about how everything today is almost based on emotion, right? These are, let's pat ourselves on the back. We're doing something good for the environment, but we're not looking at the real consequences. And we don't care about the real consequences because by the time it all hits the fan, I'm not going to be in the office, so I'm not going to bear any responsibility for it.
Right. And let's look at the hypocrisy of the leadership who actually promote this stuff. Prince Harry, really? John Kerry on his private jets?
We call him Princess Harry here.
Yeah, Prince. Well, that's interesting because I've been watching the Royals like, wow, just saying. It's like, holy cow. I thought my family was messed up as like. Anyway, but yes. And this is what I'm concerned about. I mean, man, conservatives always get a bad rap. It's like, Nick, I actually do have concerns about the environment. I actually took the time to get a degree and then not sign aboard the emotional self-flagellation of the left when they've gone through every time. The truth is, if you look at the actual facts, if you look at geologic history, we are now moving into another net gain of cold weather. That is to say, if you look at the large 1,000-year arcs of process, we're now moving into a cooling period, destined in about 10,000 years to have another ice age. So, 10,000 years from now, we're going to look at glaciers coming, and the thing that most controls weather, no matter how emotionally you feel about the environment, is the sun. And there's no technology at this point that I know of that can actually affect the actual cycles of the sun, which are literally tens of thousands of years in length.
Now, they want to, though. I mean, that's the thing. They believe that they're a higher authority than Mother Nature. They're a higher authority than God. It's truly amazing. And when we look at it, they're also putting us at massive risk, right?
Yes,
for total collapse. We've seen it in other countries that adopt the ESG ratings. Those countries are all in trouble. And then we look at China, and again, nobody's paying attention, but something that I found really interesting, getting back to the whole national security thing. Well, it's all national security, but you have Japan openly talking about now amending their constitution to allow their armed forces to be more proactive. The last time we heard talk about this was after 9/11. Japan wanted to help us out, and they didn't really take it into consideration. But now they're seriously thinking about it because they're looking at the threat of China.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
So look, I was in combat in Afghanistan, as you know, and the Japanese were there with us. I was very proud of that fact, and they weren't allowed because of their own constitution to engage in combat operations, but they were there helping us with logistics and medical support and things like that. So I was very proud. Let me say that I have some good Japanese friends, as opposed to bad Japanese friends. Just kidding. But I do respect the Japanese immensely in the way they've come around. And truth be told, because another thing they're worried about is depending on us for the nuclear umbrella. Most of your audience probably knows who study this, that we, the United States, have been the guarantor of protecting our Asian allies from nuclear threats. China and North Korea in particular to the other nations. Well, Japan doesn't trust us, and I don't know if this is going to be good to say, but the Japanese, any given time, are about 6 months out from producing their own nuclear weapon. Just saying, and they've basically come to the point of where they distrust the United States political leadership to the point of where they feel they have to act in their own self-defense and security. And I understand it and I get it. And other than them trying to maintain a vigilance for Godzilla to make sure that he doesn't come back, I think that they've got to make sure that they do actually have a robust and capable military that can defend their equities. And let me be clear on this. We did a study, one of the former think tanks I worked at, Center for Advanced Defense Studies, looked at what are the challenges of that region regarding China versus everyone else. And there's two things. One is protein. Believe it or not, there's overlapping requirements for all the fish in the region. So this is what the Japanese are trying to defend their equities on. One of the things, by the fact that you have a huge draw of a huge need in South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, India, Vietnam. All these nations need the protein that China wants, and China's got a huge population. So I see that as a major conflict. And the Japanese have actually had their Coast Guard ships challenge Chinese ships over these international waters and fishing. Secondly, it's just the overall nature of trade and control of trade. China years ago made the investment back after they moved past Mao to getting back into looking at how they can dominate global economics. And the way you do that in many ways is by establishing the capacity to do trade, to basically have ships and containers, which we see all the time. Costco is their big company. This is designed to help the Chinese reestablish dominance of global shipping. That's what we're seeing. So the Japanese are very concerned about that as well. And the way that that's being projected right now by the Chinese is they're trying to basically buy up things and also militarily intimidate folks across the board within the Pacific Rim. So the Japanese, I think, are rightfully preparing themselves to be self-reliant if necessary. And obviously, they could always partner with the Philippines, the Vietnamese, South Korea, and some of the other allies in the region, that even if we don't come along and help them out.
Well, okay, so we have the whole Japan issue going on, and then I look to Australia. And over the last, 3-4 years, Australia has spent tens of billions of dollars buying air defense systems from the United States, the aircraft carrier that's going to be built for them, as well as a general being caught giving a speech to troops. This was last year, where he stated, be prepared to be in conflict with China in the next decade. Do you think...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Do you think China's about to prepare to move? Do you think that they see the United States as at its weakest point, and that this is their best and only opportunity to try and recapture Taiwan, let's say?
Excellent question. And Nick, we knew this back 20 years ago. I was actually deployed to New Zealand as part of an exercise, joint interoperability exercise back in 2001. As a matter of fact, all of July 2001, I was there, and we were preparing even then. I mean, my goodness, that's 21 years ago. Because we saw it back then as a growing threat of China as something we had to exercise to be prepared to do. And so New Zealand, we were there. And so everything you're talking about, we've known about. It's just, I think, been more clearly articulated over the past 10 years. And what's honestly disappointing is that the politicians didn't listen to us. Like, come on, you need to see that these people are developing this capacity, not because of they're all happy and want to actually help the global order. They want to take it over. And I think that's what China's trying to do right now is dominate. And so they're going in that direction. To get to be able to do that, Nick, I think they're going to examine options for taking over Taiwan. So there are two groups. One group says within China, within PRC, we don't want to interfere with our developing a reliable market to sell our goods, to be able to continue to dominate the world. The other group are very militaristic, very nationalistic, and say, no, we just want it back. And I don't know which group's going to win out, but ultimately there are internal restrictions, which they're going through. There's domestic issues they're working through right now with Xi trying to secure his president for life status. But in the meantime, I think the most likely time they're going to have available, that is the PRC, CCP, is going to be late next year into 2024, because I think they do see, as we saw this past Monday, this week, when Biden met with Xi. I never forget, Nick, when Xi shook Biden's hand, he had this face. It was like, that face said everything to me. It's like, you're not taking this guy seriously. And so I think that Biden's lack of credibility as a global leader, because of what happened in Afghanistan, what's happened in the world stage with the Saudis, all what he's done to basically not be able to deter Vladimir Putin, all these things add up. All these things are considerations for should we go and do a military strike or not. And I think in many ways, the weakness and fecklessness showed by Joe Biden has actually increased the likelihood of an event where we go to war with these folks. As a matter of fact, we're having a session with Gordon Chang and one of our senior fellows and Major General John Kim today to talk about some of this, to go through it. So we will be exploring this. It'll be on thought to action, but that very question will be explored by us in greater detail.
And when you look at it, as Xi Jinping continues to consolidate his power, we just saw, when he was elevated to the third term, his predecessor, Hu Jintao, be taken out. And it seems
very publicly.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's amazing how disciplined they are. They all just kept looking forward. Nobody made a scene. In America, people would be gasping. You'd hear screams. But we see him consolidating power. Now, what side do you think he leans on? Do you think he's more of the militaristic side? Do you think he wants to make a big splash? Or do you think he's more of the development side? Let's continue building up and get stronger and stronger and continue to build that reliance that the international community has on China?
Based on the way he solidified his last term, I think he's leaning towards militaristic. I mean, you don't take your enemies out publicly if you're not trying to make a message. So I think in many ways, he and Putin are very much like-minded. They clearly want to develop an empire that they can oversee and they want it to be known that they're willing to use extraordinary power to do it. And Putin has made that point adequately. And I think Xi is going to do the same thing. I think he's going to try to make the point that I'm willing to do those things that are necessary to secure Chinese interests going forward to include military action. Remember, the Chinese have not done well militarily. The last time they had a major conflict, as I recall, was against Vietnam, and they got their butts kicked pretty good. So I think right now they're trying to feel their way forward to establish what they would feel is an adequate and effective military that could actually essentially decapitate the leadership in Taiwan, because the last thing they want, Nick, is to destroy the foundries, which are the global foundries for computer chips, because that is the resource they want. They want that as an economic resource. The PRC depends on that, even now, as a resource for some of their manufacturing. So they've got to be able to kind of do this in such a way that they don't destroy the resource they want to gain benefit from. At the same time, they want to establish their path forward as a unified one China that may require military force to do that. So it's something that I think that they're going to go with military force within the next 2 years.
Let's face it, in our busy lives, we don't eat enough fruits and vegetables. In fact, according to the CDC, only 1 in 10 Americans are eating the recommended daily amount of fruits and vegetables each day, missing out on essential vitamins, minerals, fibers, and antioxidants. And that's where Balance in Nature comes in. Balance in Nature sources only the best produce, free from pesticides, heavy metals, and harmful bacteria. And Balance in Nature is the best fruit and vegetable product on the market. They use only fresh, whole fruits and vegetables inside each capsule. They don't use any GMOs, fillers, binding agents, or preservatives of any kind. I would never endorse a product that I don't use myself, and since using Balance in Nature, I feel more alert, I have more energy, my focus is sharper, and I feel great. Live life to the fullest and choose Balance in Nature. P.A.S. Report listeners can get 35% off the first preferred order. Start getting the recommended daily amount of fruits and vegetables you need by using code PAS at balanceofnature.com. What concerns me, and Putin obviously made a huge miscalculation over in Ukraine, and what people don't understand, it's crazy. And what people don't understand is we gave Ukraine an enormous amount of money, billions upon billions of dollars. Yes. Putin is someone that is weaker today than he was on February 24th. Russia is weaker today than they were on February 24th. And so it's a win if we could actually stop this thing, if we could stop the conflict, bring the two sides together, come up with a deal, because Ukraine is kind of beholden to the United States. If we yield our power and influence and say, hey, we've given you all this money, so we get to dictate policy. Russia is always an adversary simply because they want to gain power and influence in the international community. What worries me about China is the fact that you have this dumb zero COVID strategy, which I can't understand for the life of me, where they lock down these major cities, people are suffering in China, and the global economy is obviously in decline. So as the economy gets worse, do you think the communist leaders, especially surrounding Xi, are going to get more and more desperate, and that's why they may want to distract with something like Taiwan?
Well, looking at the past patterns of nations which are falling into decline, yeah. I mean, look at what happened with Argentina and the Falkland Islands. Again, I was just mentioning I was watching The Crown, and it was very clear. They didn't go into a lot of the Falkland Islands details, but it was kind of enough to understand that, hey, they had problems domestically in Argentina. Let's distract by going after and retaking the Malvinas, or whatever they were called in their view. So yes, I think that a distraction from economic woes is always an option for individuals like Xi and others who are essentially totalitarians. And I think it's a good possibility. With that said, looking at the issues with Putin just for a second to compare the two, what's happened. Putin still believes in the end he will benefit from having control of the resources. The Donbass in that area, the reason we're having this war really is because of resources, because back in 2012, they found great reserves of natural gas and oil in those regions. That's what Putin's after. So he'll be just happy if he stopped today, they will be happy with what they gained because they've gained more control of resources. And I think the Chinese may be thinking the same thing. It's like, if we go out and just get Taiwan and we suffer some losses, it's okay, because like you just pointed out, Nick, they're willing to do lockdowns. They're willing to do self-damage to their own economy by taking these extreme positions. So if you're willing to go to that extreme, what's a little war to gain a resource that, we may lose it for a year, but we'll bring it back up. And again, that to me is a dangerous thought process because it's not only Taiwan, it's about the fact that the loss of resource from Taiwan would kick off a global recession. I think that would be pretty darn bad because we put all of our eggs in that one basket, which I think it was so we've been saying this is probably not the wisest move of putting all of this resource in time. Yeah, they do great jobs producing it. It's great quality, but do you really want to have it in one place that's kind of being sought after by a dictator? I don't know if that's a good idea. Anyway.
Yeah, and yet we've done nothing about it here on the domestic front. But last question, because everything in the international community is preventable, right? I mean, looking at Russia, Ukraine, that was easily preventable. I was warning about it from March of 2021. What is the United States? What should the United, not what we're doing, what should we be doing in order to prevent potential conflicts from metastasizing, from bringing us down that road where it would be global economic devastation, major military conflict, and the potential to lead to a larger global conflict?
So, as you know, Nick, I was mentored by a lot of the Reagan guys, and I always look back at their successes to judge from. And I've actually met with one of the former members of the cabinet, talk about this just a few months ago. And God rest his soul, Bud McFarlane was a dear friend and mentor, and Bud helped instruct me a lot on this because, they had to go through a lot of brinksmanship. And I think that's what's missing here. To be effective on the international stage, you have to demonstrate political will. Political will is necessary for establishing credible deterrence. Credible deterrence has to have two things. First, credibility. It's kind of in the name. Secondly, a capacity that is verifiable, or at least your adversary believes it to be true. And this was true of Star Wars. Star Wars, man, talk about a bluff. We're never going to be able to deliver a technologically sufficient program to knock down Russian missiles, but they believed that we could. And that was what really helped collapse the whole Soviet concept of defense. It did. So Nick, we just simply don't have people who can think at those levels and be credible at this point. And that's what my first guidance is. You need to reestablish political clarity and political will that others on the international stage are willing to accept. Because right now, if Putin, and this has happened, Biden's come forward and said, we're not going to stand for Russian nukes being used in Ukraine. It's like, nobody believes him. Nobody, which then increases the potential of it happening. So the first step is reestablish viable political will that can be linked to deterrence. And the record of this administration is just horrific. What should they do? They need to change who's in charge. I'd fire Lloyd Austin. I know General Austin. I worked with him in combat. He needs to go. Whether he's the party or not, it's the image of him being feckless, being yelled at by the Chinese. And Tony Blinken, same thing. Blinken's been yelled at by the Chinese.
And Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor.
You got to just say, hey, these guys do not reflect my policy now. And I would be very clear. And Biden could do this. I mean, I'm saying Biden could bring in people who are credible and could reestablish the appearance of a political will that could do something. But it requires really cleaning house and bringing in new leadership. Secondly, they've really got to get on top of credible programs which show that we can do it, that not only do we have the political will, we have the capacity to do something. They got to basically immediately refill the strategic reserve, and they do that by increasing domestic production, saying we're going to kick off domestic production to refill the reserve, and anything that comes out of it will help alleviate other global crisis regarding oil. That would be one of the first things that would help solve a lot of issues. And secondly, they've got to get on top of replacing all those weapons, Nick, that they've given the Ukrainians. I mean, that's been a good news, bad news thing. Good news is we've seen a lot of the technology we've invested in over the past 20 years. Yeah, it works very well. Man, Russian armor, man, we've got some systems out there that make tank almost superfluous. I mean, it's like, wow, it's like those things can take out armor, but they're expensive and they're limited. So you use them all, and what do you got? So we've got to replenish the stocks of that. And the other thing we've got to basically put back on in the chart, and I know people don't want to hear this, a credible nuclear deterrent. We had signed up, and I was part of the effort to actually witness the destruction of the intermediate range nuclear missiles, INF. I was part of the INF treaty. I actually was part of a joint Army intelligence FBI team that monitored the Russians, Soviets coming here in the 1980s to watch our dismantling our nuclear weapons. Mike Pompeo pulled us out of that treaty during the Trump administration because the Russians weren't abiding by it. They were creating intermediate range nuclear missiles, and so were the Chinese. So basically, Trump and Pompeo said, why are we the only ones actually living within the treaty obligation? So we've gone back now and started creating, and of course, they've always got the W-61 gravity bombs, which they've improved several times. So we do have a tactical capacity, but not as robust as the Chinese or Russians. And again, it's not for use, but any deterrent has to be credible. And unless you have weaponry that goes with the deterrent, you're not going to have a credible deterrent. So I am not for being bellicose or increasing unlimited quantities of nuclear weapons, but you've got to have a number that people feel that you can credibly use if you need to. And right now we don't have that. So I think those are the things that this administration must do to get a handle. Third thing, they've got to get into this whole finance thing. We had the immensely horrific failure of FTX. FTX has been compared to Enron, and I think it's true. I mean, I'm just looking at this.
I think it's worse than Enron.
I think you're right, because I was trying to go through my morning education was focused on trying to learn more about that. But you had Zelensky involved, you had the Democrats involved, you had a lot of money now that they can't find. Where did it go? Well, I kind of know. These things all have to be sorted out because, again, the United States has involved itself politically with some really bad actors. And I think this has all been done to benefit the Democrat Party. And the reason I'm saying this is a political issue linked to national security is because I think Zelensky and the Ukrainians bought the Biden family. And that's why we are so over the top invested in defending Ukraine. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm saying we shouldn't to the level we're doing where we're just sending all sorts of cash over without accountability. We're sending all sorts of weapon systems without accountability. I parallel this to the Afghanistan issue by the fact that we have, and still do, I still get emails from them, a special IG, Special Inspector General for Afghanistan, who actually studied where everything went. And they're still giving reports. Even though we've lost everything, they're still giving reports like, here's where it went. We don't have that for Ukraine. And I think it's immensely important that we reestablish an understanding of our relationship because they're not a NATO nation. We have no obligation to them. We try to figure out what our strategy and in-state, what do we want? What do we want for that conflict? Because I don't think we have an in-state objective available. And I think you mentioned this. I think we need to negotiate an end to that before it escalates or gets worse. And then third, most important, we are degrading our own defense for purposes of defending Ukraine because we have to replenish all of those weapon systems to be credible. And I don't know if we've done that yet. So those are the three things that I would hope they would do. If I were asked to go to the White House, which I probably won't, if I were asked to go to the White House and brief Jake Sullivan on what needs to be done, those are the things I'd recommend.
Well, and I think your last point is the most troublesome. I was listening to, I think it was the Raytheon CEO. I think they make the Javelins, and they were saying how they only could produce about 400 to 600 Javelins each year. And given the semiconductor shortage, it's actually less. So it's not like we could ramp up production if we need to. Tony, always a fascinating conversation. And I appreciate you coming on to educate the audience.
Thank you. Always great to join you. Thanks for having me.
I love talking to the Lieutenant Colonel. You got to read his book, Operation Dark Heart. Check out Project Sentinel. They do some amazing work. I have all the links up at the P.A.S. Report website, PASreport.com. Don't forget to tune in on Wednesday. I'll be talking about a topic that rarely gets covered, so you won't want to miss it. As always, please share this episode with family and friends and on social media. If you find the podcast informative, please give the PAS Report a 5-star rating, write a review on Apple Podcasts. I want to thank you for joining me, and I will be back on Wednesday with another great episode of the PAS Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.